Diana, welcome to the podcast. It's so great to have you here.
Oh, it's so nice to be on. It's so great to see you.
Yes, you sent me such a great pitch. I was so excited that I wrote back with an emoji after every line, which I never do, because it was that good.
Oh, that is too sweet. Well, I mean, we were chatting a little bit about this before we started recording, but I think so much of life is, mindset and being compelling. And every time I write a podcast pitch, which lately I try to do one a day right now because I'm really in that audience building stage. When I write it with such determination that I am going to impact the person that is reading it. So I'm really glad that was effective and that we get to now become friends and jam on the podcast.
Yeah, it was definitely effective. So there's so many things that I want to talk to you about, but I first want to talk about you've had so much success in, you've sold 2 companies already and you're such a successful entrepreneur. What do you think has attributed to your success?
Oh, I wish I could say that it was talent, but it's definitely hard, just like grind. And I'm not, one of those people that thinks you need to like grind your whole life and, work 60, 80 hours a week. But I am so hardworking and I am so determined. And in the season that I need to be, I have been. So, in startup mode, I definitely, worked my butt off with every company I've ever had. And I'm, in a new startup mode, which is very bizarre for me because it's, 10 years as an entrepreneur with a new startup. And I'm sure we'll get into that as we go. But there are certain seasons where you need to have, laser focus, determination, and just do whatever it takes. And I think that is really what it has been for me, just being willing to do whatever it takes. There's that great quote that entrepreneurs, and I'm totally going to butcher it, but entrepreneurs do what no one is willing to do so that they can like live like no one does in the future. And I have found that to be true after 10 years of being in the space.
So let's talk about your first business and the grind there. What did that really look like when you were first starting out? I mean, you had never had a business before. Were you dealing with doubt? I mean, the road is not paved for entrepreneurs. So what did the grind look like in the very beginning?
Sure. So it's funny because I actually think the road is almost becoming paved for entrepreneurs. It's almost switching. But yes, 10 years ago, being an entrepreneur was not something people talked about. It was not cool. There wasn't a big conversation about it. And I didn't have any entrepreneurial friends. And I had just finished law school. So that was my background. Did not want to be a lawyer and felt very, very lost. So not knowing what I wanted to do, I started applying for different employment positions that I thought might be a better fit. So creative roles, things around communications and marketing. And it was 2008. And I applied for hundreds of jobs in a new city, and I did not get a single interview. And it was the most depressing moment of my life. Here I am just out of school. I had done 7 years of post-secondary education. This was my time to get out there and start, adding value, and nobody wanted me. And, it was a lot more complicated than that. The economy had just crashed. I was in a city with no network. And people were very confused at my resume because it said lawyer, and here I was applying for a marketing assistant position. So I got very lucky. I went to a job fair where instead of applying for a job, I ended up applying for a business grant, and I got $3,000 to start my first company. And I mean, what that looked like was pretty slow growth for the first 3 to 4 months. Again, back then they didn't have Wix and Squarespace and all these things that made it very easy to get, websites and things like that at. So, I hired a web designer. It took a really long time. I got a website up without a cart. And I mean, this site was pretty basic, but I remember people being like, wow, like you have this really beautiful website. Because at the time, like the standard was really low. And the day that the website with the cart went up, we had a custom e-commerce website and shop built. I had done so much prep work up until that point through building relationships and community on Facebook organic that we paid for the site in the first day. And that first month I called my best and worst month of my life because we did over 10K in sales, but I had no team, I had no systems, no processes, no inventory, and an order would come in and I'd have to make it.
And what were you selling?
Sorry, the company was Tiny Devotions, and we sold mala beads and yoga inspired jewelry, which, I mean, now there are literally thousands of companies selling this. At the time, it was a blue ocean, and we were the first company to create a product in this niche in North America.
So you did the right thing at the right time. But
Hundo P.
But I want to touch on something because you went to law school and then you didn't want to become a lawyer and you felt lost. And then you started making mala beads. How did that come about? You know, like, can you put some of the pieces together for us?
Absolutely. So 3 weeks into law school, and I mean, I went to law school in Australia. It was by far living the dream. Even though I wasn't into law school, I was surfing a lot of days and running on the beach, and it was heaven on earth. And that's what got me through law school. But after law school, I knew I didn't want to be a lawyer and I didn't have a better plan. So what I did was a little bit unconventional, though almost becoming, you know, a normalized story now. But I sold all my belongings, my surfboard, my drum, my car, and I fled to Bali. And in Bali, I had already been really into yoga at the time. So I, on a whim, signed up for a second yoga teacher training. I had just done a 200-hour yoga teacher training, and I did another 200 hours. And it was in Bali that I was really looking around, and I think I took the first step in trying to be an entrepreneur, and I was looking for the business idea. And I had time and space. You know, I wasn't doing that much besides doing some yoga, and I was doing lots of meditation. And so it just had put me in this really interesting mindset. So while I was in Bali, I decided I would either import art from Bali, teach yoga and do retreats, or create this yoga jewelry thing because I had seen some really cool LA hipster kids wearing these. And I knew that I wasn't super cool, but they were, and I felt like they were ahead of the trend. And at the time, I was very fascinated with Lululemon and the rise of yoga. So I connected the dots that this yoga thing was growing, Lululemon was growing, and this idea was almost like the jewelry version of Lululemon.
Okay. So I love that you were like, I left my belongings, like a drum, a surfboard, and some other things. So that brings me to my next question, because there's some risks you're already taking, right? Like you're leaving your belongings, you're going on a yoga retreat, you're already doing the unconventional thing. Where does the money piece come in? Because I know that's a lot of your work now, which we'll get into. So a lot of people don't do these things because they feel like I have to make money, right? So where did that fit in terms of your mindset?
Yeah, so I knew I was going back to Canada 2 months later. And I knew that as soon as I got back to Canada from Australia, that's like when reality was going to set in. So I felt like I had like one last hurrah. It felt like this was my last opportunity to do something crazy before I went back to kind of like, you know, the boring traditional life. And I totally went into debt by going to Bali. I came back with $10,000 of debt. And I thought my parents would help me, and they definitely were not going to do that. Ended up getting a legal placement. So before I went through that unemployment period, I had a 3-month legal placement that I had to finish up. And the pivotal moment around my love of finances really happened during that pain point. I was in a really negative space because I had just come back from Bali in Australia and like living the dream to living in a suburban city in Canada. And I was working in this like, you know, 8 to 8, this way probably more like a 9 to 5 actually, but working in this legal placement in this building, in this cubicle, and I was hating my life, and I had all this debt. And I was complaining to my father of like, oh, Dad, this sucks. I'm making no money. You know, I have all this debt. And he looked at me like with disgust, being like, Diana, there are people who have 2 kids and a family off of what you're making in this legal placement. If you don't understand how to manage this amount of money, you will never manage your money properly. So you need to figure this out. And it was the right thing at the right time. And it affected me on such a deep level that for the next 3 months, I did not spend a dollar of discretionary earnings. And I was very lucky. I was living with my parents at the time, so I didn't have a lot of expenses, but I paid off all the debt before I started my business. So it gave me, that experience of feeling debt and feeling what it felt like to be in the red. And it felt horrible to me. And it was an experience that I never ever wanted to have
So you made a decision.
again.
What was the decision that you made?
Yeah, I think the decision was to learn how to manage money and to never be in debt again.
Yeah. So let's go a little bit more into your business
Sure.
of right. So now you're selling mala beads, and you know, how did you find customers when you launched? You made $10,000 in your first month. That's amazing. How did you have
Yes.
customers?
Yeah. So again, like what worked 10 years ago, does not work, but the principles are still the same, which is, find a marketing strategy that you're good at, that has opportunities, and exploit it. And so at the time, like I really loved social media. Facebook at the time was a huge opportunity, specifically like Facebook organic, which I know that is a much more challenging channel these days. Everyone always laughs when I bring that up. And then the other thing I did very early on was I did influencer marketing before influencer marketing was a thing. And it came down to one of my best skills in the world is I'm extremely resourceful. So if I have nothing, I will find a way to do what I need to do with nothing. And so all I had was these products. I didn't have a marketing budget. So I figured out, hey, like, what if I gave these beads to yoga influencers and yoga teachers that people like look up to? I really looked at the yoga teacher as someone who had a lot of authority.
Hmm.
And I know I looked up to yoga teachers. So why don't I send products to these inspirational yoga teachers? Their students want to be just like them. And so it was more like common sense. Let's just do that. So that was pretty much my marketing strategy for years. Facebook organic and sending mala beads out to influencers. Unfortunately, because that was working so well, I missed some really big opportunities like Facebook paid. There was an opportunity where it cost pennies to get leads back in the day. And I unfortunately didn't have like the vision and understanding of how much faster I could grow. And I don't think I was able to keep up operationally with how I was growing already. So I wasn't aggressive enough with that. If I could go back again, I would have invested very, very heavily in paid because I was sitting on tons of cash and not utilizing it.
Well, I think you also bring up a really important piece is that so many people think that they need to spend money to make money. And there's so many free resources. I mean, I built my company on so many free resources just by being resourceful that, you can, like, relationships, for example, you oftentimes you don't necessarily need to pay for relationships, but I got good placement on Google early on as a life coach in New York City because 10 years ago, just as the mala beads,
Yeah,
were kind of coming up, so was the coaching industry. And
fully.
I was on the front page of Google, and I didn't have to pay for anything.
Wow,
So
that's amazing.
I think there's something to be said about looking at also what can you do for free.
Yeah, and even 100%. That's how I built my first company. And so, I started my current business right now in September. So that's like pretty aggressive 3 months ago. And you know what? To be honest, I have tons of money that I could use to scale it faster, but that's not the phase. I'm in phase one, which is grind. It's like low hanging fruit. It's relationships. It's doing what, I love. And I'm very fortunate that I have invested in my network a lot over the past 5-6 years. So a lot of my friends are multi 6, 7, and 8 figure entrepreneurs that are my target market and also friends with my target market. So I'm not even doing any kind of paid marketing. I'm just going to my friends and being like, hey, you guys have huge audiences, can I create valuable content that will serve your audience? And they're like, yeah, sure, that's exactly what we need right now. So I think that's a great phase for every business. There's no point of scaling until you have done that low hanging fruit season and got everything super dialed in, got your
Yeah.
messaging dialed in, your website dialed in, your offering super dialed in. And I think, for the first year, as fast as you're moving, there's things that you got to tweak until you really have that plan and you really want to pour fire on it.
Yeah. Building the right foundation.
Totally.
Yeah. So I'm curious about your exit. So you're no longer in that business that you first started, the mala bead industry. Is that right?
Yes.
And you
So I
sold it.
Yeah. So I've had two exits. They're both in e-commerce. Funny enough, the second e-commerce I started, I sold first. So there's a
Okay.
little bit of a confusing order there. That was a e-commerce sock company called Cole and Parker. It was a social enterprise. We loaned proceeds from the socks to entrepreneurs through Kiva. It is still running. There's a new owner. So this one was very interesting. You hear everyone talking about alignment.
Mhm.
And it's sometimes easy to discount alignment as this elitist thing or this thing that you shouldn't really worry about. And for someone who has like lived through being out of alignment for a huge amount of time, I would caution you that if you are out of alignment right now in an area of your life and in your business, you need to like have a serious pause and see how you can get out of that or come into alignment with that ASAP. So one of the negatives about Tiny Devotions was quite successful quite quickly, and I very quickly grew out of it and grew out of the alignment. But I felt almost like people say sometimes a 9 to 5 feels like a ball and chain. This company actually felt that way to me because it was really successful and making a lot of money and giving me this beautiful lifestyle, but I really didn't feel aligned with it for years. I can't even pinpoint when it was, but it was at least 5, 6, 7 years that it was out of alignment for me. So when I went to sell it, I started the process about 2 years before I sold it. I was in such a bad position with this company because I really didn't even want it anymore. And for anyone who is considering, ever selling a business, there's a great book called Early Exits. You often want to sell way earlier than you think you want to or have to. You never want to get to the place of like hating the company when you sell it because, everything is energy and it's just very obvious that you're in that kind of relationship with the company. And so, yeah, I mean, I feel like this exit, unfortunately, was a little bit of a train wreck. I did not time it beautifully. I did have like a multi-million-dollar offer in due diligence 3 months after listing it, and then that one fell apart. And then I had probably like 20 other deals fell apart. I ultimately sold it for a fraction of what I was going to sell it for, 2 years before. And I feel like I almost wasted 2 years on the sales process. So retrospectively, even though I sold it, and I did sell it to like exactly the kind of person that I was hoping to sell it to, which was really cool. I almost feel like I would have made more money in the long run had I got out of it as soon as it was out of alignment instead of grinding it out in the sale. So my gift of grinding actually is my blind spot as well,
Mhm.
because sometimes I don't want to give up when sometimes the wise strategic thing to do is actually to walk away. And I know some people have been in that conversation lately. Samantha Wills, she's an amazing jewelry designer in New York. I don't know if are you familiar with her?
Oh, I'm not familiar with her.
She's shutting down her, I think it's like over 8 figure jewelry
Wow.
company because it's not in alignment for her. I think Lisa Messenger is another one. So I love this conversation that's happening in the marketplace right now of these amazing wise women that are realizing like their successful projects are not in alignment. And instead of trying to sell, which, maybe they will, maybe they won't, maybe they'll lose years of their lives trying to do that, they're just moving forward fearlessly. And it's amazing what happens when you step into alignment, that accelerated path that you were on. Once you're an entrepreneur, no one can take that away from you.
Yeah.
Whether you apply that to a physical product or a service, it doesn't matter. And, for me, I have never done anything in the online education space and anything in the service space. So at first I was like, this is a little bit new to me. But once you're an entrepreneur, you're an entrepreneur. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah. So the alignment piece is so interesting, right? Because here you're having like all of this success, but you're you're not feeling in alignment. So how do you think that, because I think so many people listening to this can relate to that. Maybe they're in a job and they're making lots of money, but they're not really feeling in alignment. And entrepreneurs can also feel like, they have built this business, but something doesn't feel like they're in alignment. And how do they pivot? So what advice would you give to somebody, or how can you help people kind of make a transition when they are out of alignment and they notice it?
So definitely the awareness is the first thing. And I'm sure, this is stuff that you do with your clients and really it's so valuable. I mean, having a coach is one of the most valuable things. I've gone through seasons where like, there's just no way I could have got through without having coaches. I mean, I've had life coaches, business coaches, a sales coach for selling the business and so on. So like, I am all about coaching, because so much of this is like mindset and awareness, and you really need someone to guide you through this stuff. It's way too close to you. So that'd be the first thing. And actually one of the things I did is there's an amazing transition coach, career transition coach, Ricky Hansen. Are you familiar with her?
No.
She's phenomenal. You should have her on the podcast. She's such a badass. And she's in a mastermind with me, and I worked with her for a year, up to the process of like, I knew Tiny Devotions was going to be going. I had no idea what was next. And she really helped me go through a few ideas I had, because I have so many ideas. I'm like the classic visionary, like I should start a company for people with insomnia, which I still want to do one day. I should start a Christian jewelry company, which I probably will do that as well one day. So she really helped me identify what my zone of genius was, helped me see my blind spots,
Mhm.
and just like encouraged me that like it was all going to be okay on the other side, which yeah, retrospectively, I'm like, as if I even doubted myself for a second. And anyone who knows me as well, even like my team, when I told them that I was selling, our last month, and expressed that I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do next. They were like, oh my gosh, you're going to figure it out in 10 seconds. Like, so it's amazing that the people around you know you so much more sometimes than you know yourself, which is why coaching is so valuable. So I think awareness, getting support, and then just taking baby steps.
Mhm.
So for me, one of the things I did was, while I still owned Tiny Devotions, and one of the things that didn't align for me was around, my faith. I actually started building a Christian jewelry company to start exploring what that would feel like. So I was able to use kind of the resources of my company and my suppliers to start building that, which was, really helpful. And the other thing I did was, I just looked for opportunities that felt like a hell's yes. And so another girl in my mastermind, she runs an amazing company called Studio Expansion. She helps dance teachers scale their company. She posted in our mastermind years ago, or a year and a half ago, before I was doing this work, that she was looking for someone in the group to be a speaker at her event and speak about finance, profitability, passive income, all these things. And I read this and I was like, I'm way too busy. I can't do this, but I have to do this. So I said yes to her, and I took on that speaking gig and did this presentation to her community before I even had this business, because I wanted to actually feel, what did it feel like doing this work?
Mhm.
So doing any kind of trial run you can do, I feel like is so helpful. And the feedback that she gave me was absolutely incredible. The feedback I had in my body was
Mhm.
just so good that like, that was the first kind of seedling of, I'm like really, really good at this entrepreneur finance thing. Like, this should be the work that I'm doing in the world. But if it wasn't for that experience, I probably wouldn't have had the push to do the work.
I love that you mentioned the feedback that you got in your body, 'cause it
Yeah,
it it gives you feedback. You can feel that hell
totally.
yes. Yeah.
Oh yeah, I was like, I mean, I did like 40 hours of prep for this thing for, not an insane amount of money, but the payoff of like being so high after doing that, it was just like, oh my gosh, that was so much fun. Like I got to serve, I got to help so many people. It was just a blast. And I knew that there was something there. And as soon as the space opened, like a week after I sold the company, again, like very clear downloads of like, this is the work that you need to do. And like one Facebook post later, I had like 3 clients. So it was like, okay, the one Facebook post caused a lot of damage.
Yeah, yeah. So let's talk a little bit about where you are now with your business. You're still in the early phases, and I'd love to hear about your current business and what you're offering.
Sure. So we have two other businesses that we have had for many years that kind of tie into this one. So one of them is I'm a private lender. So what we do is we do mortgages for people in situations that banks won't finance. So we work with developers, commercial real estate investors, builders, and things like that. So I've already been in like the finance space for some time, and we're also commercial real estate developers and investors. So I've kind of
So I
been
just want to
in that
pause
space.
because you've been doing a lot, Diana. You've been busy. Um, so while you had these companies, you also had other companies.
Yes, and it's funny because it's all shifting for me. So how I look at kind of entrepreneurship and wealth, often there is your operating business, but then there is like your personal vehicles for wealth and success. And this is getting clearer for me literally every day. But real estate for entrepreneurs as a vehicle for massive wealth generation is just so big. And when I look at my net worth, I'm going to be on Eventual Millionaire. It's a great podcast. I don't know if it's on your radar.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I'm familiar
And
with it.
so for that, you had to, say what your net worth was, and then you also had to do the breakdown of where that net worth came from. And I was like, oh, this is really crazy. I've sold two companies. I've operated e-commerce companies for like 10 years, but most of my net worth has come from real estate.
Okay.
So, and it's this other thing I do. Like it's the other thing. So I think that's a really interesting thing for entrepreneurs to think about. Is your business the thing that is going to create the wealth? Or is your business the thing that's going to feed, the investments that are going to create wealth? So that's just like a mindset shift. And I actually just spoke at a real estate investing event last week called Fire. And I was a speaker. I literally left being like, why is like the real estate investing the third thing on my list? Like, whereas again, that's where most of the wealth has come. So in my head, I'm reworking how I prioritize that and how I look at that, because I really think that's where the dial is moved the most. So I think it's just important for entrepreneurs to think about that. Like, yes, I have a business and businesses are important, but what is the other thing you do? And so with the private lending company, my husband is a serial entrepreneur and he is, pretty much the face of that company. So I'm more back end and like vision and leadership. So it's not like I was like day to day in that company or anything like that. And then again, real estate development is this other thing that we just always have a real estate development project. And we almost don't think of it as a business,
Hmm.
but it totally is. And so because I was already in that space, I'm very comfortable with numbers, and it was kind of already just this normal thing. And so when I got into the entrepreneur finance consulting business, what I essentially do, and it's all kind of ties in together eventually, is what I'm trying to allude to. And this wasn't on purpose. This is kind of the accidental super funnel. But I work with very successful, like multi 6, 7, and 8-figure entrepreneurs, and most of them are very good at revenue generating activities. So they're great at sales, they're great at speaking on stage, they're great at creating products, packages, and offers. And so they're great at that, which I call like front end stuff, but they're often very weak at the back end stuff, which is, making sure that there are financial systems and processes, making sure that they're focused on profitability. If you ask an entrepreneur, what's your 2019 business goal, they're going to tell you a revenue goal. Very few of them are going to tell you what the corresponding profitability goal is. And I mean, I could tell you so many stories about, entrepreneurs that make 10 million in revenue and spend 11 million in expenses. So I've been calling this like an epidemic amongst entrepreneurs, that the conversation is all about revenue as opposed to what I think the real number is, which is, profitability. You can't pay your mortgage off revenue. You can't, buy an investment off of revenue. So how it started was just literally working one-on-one with entrepreneurs in, my network, because again, a lot of my entrepreneurs are these very successful entrepreneurs, and running them through the framework that I had taken 10 years to develop about profitability. And we're happy to get into that as we go. And what I've realized, so one of my frameworks for myself is I have always tried to be the least important person within my companies. And so with Tiny Devotions, for the last 5 years, I did not answer a phone call. I did not have any customer facing or supplier, emails. I had a team that ran all the day-to-day stuff, and I got to sit in the seat of the business owner as opposed to the business operator. So these are principles that I also apply with my clients one-on-one, and we work in a 90-day profit sprint. So our first call, we always do like a deep dive, which is almost like my doctor's appointment checkup, where like everything goes on the table, and there's a mindset piece, there's an organization piece, there's a finance piece, there is a profit and loss statement piece, there's a business model piece. It's like all the things. We look at the whole company, and it's like an audit, but not just of financials, it's of the whole operation. And from there, we create like a 90-day implementation plan. And then in the profit sprint, I help their team implement that plan. So that's my current offering. And in the spring, we are launching the more scalable offer, which is going to be the Profit Accelerator. And that is a group program that will allow, more people to do this work in a more scalable way.
Are there common themes that you see with entrepreneurs that you work with? Is it overspending, or do you find that there's certain beliefs that keep appearing?
100%. So the reason I'm doing the one-on-one work is I want to know every single pattern that is out there so I can put it in the scalable program. And so, I mean, there's so many. I'll just give you a few. Here's one. A lot of entrepreneurs will pay their team, especially their high-level team members, more than them.
Mm-hmm.
And okay, so there's a story in the world that entrepreneurs are greedy, blah, 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 that they make so much money. The reality is entrepreneurs are some of the most generous people in the world. They care so much about people. They care so much about their team, and they do not want to appear greedy. They do not, want to play into that stereotype. And I always say that employees think that entrepreneurs make way more money than they do. And often the entrepreneur is scared to make that amount of money. And they're not even close to that. And I'm always telling them, don't even worry. Your employees think you're making way more money than you want to be making anyways.
Why do you think that is? Why do you think they're scared?
I don't know if I have the definitive answer of what that is. It definitely is. There's definitely like the word insecurity keeps coming up.
Mm-hmm.
But feeling insecure and not having permission to be rewarded for the risk that they have taken in this venture. And like what I can relate it to is a personal experience that I had. And you know what, maybe I'll change my answer after the story because it just gave me another idea of what it could be. So I have not worked in my office. I was telling you this before we started recording, for many, many years. So I have an office downtown London. My team works out of here. I only come in for meetings and like very specific creative projects. The reason why is I'm very introverted. I'm very like sensitive. I need to work in like an absolutely quiet place by myself, or I'm just too distracted. And so I felt very guilty about this for years because I felt unfair. I was like, well, that's not fair. My team has to work in the space. How come I do? And why I went to Necker Island, which is Richard Branson's private island, is I had heard that he does not work in his office ever. And he hadn't from the beginning. And I wanted to see somebody who embodied this and did not feel guilty. I wanted to just see how was he in the world? How did he be? And it was amazing. I realized like that was not his zone of genius. And I understood that like he did best, working from home or from his island or from his safari place in South Africa. And he had people that were, steady, stable people that loved working in the office and that loved kind of that steadiness. And so I think maybe to kind of revisit my answer, like, I think a lot of it is like entrepreneurs just haven't been in the conversation and haven't been given the permission slip that like you deserve to be rewarded for the crazy risk that you took. And, there's an entrepreneur I'm working with right now. If he was in the corporate world, he would make 250K for sure. His skill set and gifts in the corporate world is worth 250K for sure. He's paying himself 30K. Mm. And so, I mean, he's not anymore. Like session one, I'm like, minimum, you're making 6 figures minimum. Like that's like not even, like we're not even talking about that. We're going to architect the profitability of this company so that you're at least making 6 figures right off the bat, and then let's work on getting a lot more profit coming through anyways. So does that answer that?
Yeah, I mean, it resonates. And so you said something earlier in the conversation that stuck with me, which was you were talking about how your zone of genius is to grind to some extent, but then the shadow side of it has also been some of your challenge, right? And it sounds kind of similar in the sense where a lot of entrepreneurs can be really good at making money, but not managing money, right? So
Absolutely.
there's always these, our strengths and our gifts can also have these shadow sides, and we have to be really mindful of what are those shadow sides to our gifts, because I think that's where we can get caught.
Absolutely. And I'm not telling my clients that they need to become CFOs. My wish for them is to become chief financial entrepreneurs. And what that means is empowering, the people around them and their finance team, and having the proper team so that they don't have to be that person, but that they have someone who is being that person for them. And, one of my clients, we have this running joke right now that, in the future, I want her to pour a glass of red wine, which is her favorite, and open QuickBooks for fun. Not because she has to, not because that's her role, but she wants to sit down and be like, ooh, I want to check in and read the story of my business over a glass of wine, because that's a fun owner's role, not because she has to go in and do something in there. So it's just helping entrepreneurs realize what is their zone of genius? That's something we talk about in every single call. Do they have the other people around them that they need? And what is the part in the finances that they actually want to take on? What does that look like? And making it fun for them again.
Do you think a lot of it has to do with simply looking at what's going on?
100%. Yes. It has to be organized in a way that if you look at it, you can read it. And I always tell people they need to be able to, someone dumb and drunk could be able to look at your profit and loss statement and understand in 5 minutes of what's actually happening in the business. And so most entrepreneurs have an organizational problem with their profit and loss statement. It's not organized in a way that is just very basic and clean. Sometimes it's 5 pages long, sometimes it's 4 lines long, and there's usually a happy medium of a page and a half, where all the marketing expenses are organized in one place, all the team expenses, so that you can get real percentages of are you spending 5% or are you spending 40% on your marketing? Which I'll ask an entrepreneur, how much do you think you're spending on marketing? And they're probably 5%. And then once we organize it properly, it's oh shit, it's 40%. So yeah, the organization piece is there. Once that's there and entrepreneurs see the percentages, they know what to do.
Yeah.
Because they're smart. Once they can read the story, they're oh shoot, maybe I should change that, and that. And so what I'm trying to show them is they don't need to create the reports. They can have their bookkeeper or finance administrator create the reports in a very short email for them. They just need to look at this report for 15 minutes a month and just be themselves. And the rest of the pieces will pretty much fall into place.
So I want to shift gears a little bit and get a little bit more into your mindset, because I think that's so important. And I'm shifting more into really these interviews, tapping more into that, because I think it's so important. And I saw one of your YouTube videos where you were talking about how you got a coach. And I'm just curious about, what are some of your other practices that you maintain your mindset? Are there mantras that you have? Do you do visualization? What do you do to maintain your level of ability to perform?
Such a great question. And it's funny. I feel and I don't know if I think I've always had a pretty good mindset, but in this season, I am in an unstoppable mindset. It's watch out, world. And even my husband, he's I don't think I've ever seen you quite this fired up ever. And I'm yeah, it's because you've never seen me in startup mode. This is startup mode requires something unreasonable. And so, I mean, for me, I'm a Christian, and it's faith first. So my prayer practice, my relationship with God, going to church, that is by far the number one thing. It's all God, and God, where do you want me to serve? So it's faith working through me. Journaling is really big for me, just reflecting, anything I can do to get very self-aware. Having really strong women around me that can call me on my bullshit because even though my mindset's pretty unstoppable, we constantly need that feedback loop, or we'll get caught up in things. And so recently I went with my mastermind to Richard Branson's safari in South Africa, and 15 days shoulder to shoulder with some of the brightest women. Angela Loria was one of them. I know we were talking about her before. Literally, I left high on life. I was like, I'm just so inspired. So many people lovingly called me out on little areas that I had been missing.
Like what? What's a little area?
So one of them was patience, actually. So okay, I went into my hot seat. I was like, ladies, this is what I'm doing. I feel like it's not fast enough. Like, what's everything I need to do extra? And they're like, oh my gosh, you're doing everything you can do in this phase. You're just in that phase. Like, so reaffirming to me that I was doing everything I was doing really helped that, like, that grind part of me calm down of like, oh, okay, there is nothing more, you know, you can be doing.
I think patience is so important.
Yeah. It's so hard for us, like type A driven, you know, entrepreneurs.
Yeah. And I think our society is just making it even more like now, you know, and it's like our expectations have gotten a little bit out of alignment. And then when we're constantly comparing ourselves to these expectations that we should be further along, we're left feeling either, you know, like that we're not living up to something that we should be and we're falling short. So I think that patience is really important as an entrepreneur.
It's so key. And it's the thing that we struggle with, you know, the most, a lot of us. So just being really grateful, you know, in the moment. And I think someone said on that retreat, like, how lucky you are that you get to experience the startup phase again. Like you're only going to be able to do that so many more times in your life. And like, I mean, I'm emotional thinking about that because it's true. Yeah. Like the startup phase, like it's intense.
And Diana, I think you love the grind.
I do love the grind. I know I am. I really am. And you know what? And I can't do it forever. And I know that, like, there are seasons of grinding, and then there are seasons of resting and playing and toning it down. And it's true. And I can even tell right now, we're getting to that end of the year where things are getting really crazy socially. Like, everyone's trying to finish a lot of things up. Like, I can tell I'm like, I got to back off a bit. I can tell. I'm like, it's a little bit too much. Like today I've been up since 4 a.m. and I'm back to back till like 9 p.m. and then I'm driving to Toronto. Like that's too much. And my husband and I have been in conversation about that the past few days of like, okay, we need to tone this down. But yeah, it's true. I love the grind. It's a blast.
Yeah. What's the best advice you've ever been given?
Wow. I'm totally blanking right now. I mean, okay, I know what it is. So definitely the best advice I've ever been given is from my neighbor, who is a very successful entrepreneur. And he said this to me when I was single and I was really lost in what I wanted to do with my life. And he said, Diana, more important than what you do in your life is who you spend your life with. And that hit me because it also was coming from a very successful entrepreneur. He had built like a little empire, and he was like, no, don't focus on like that career thing. And again, this was in a phase where I felt like I need to prove myself. Like, why am I not doing something right now? And he was like, don't even worry about that. Focus on the people that you are spending your life with, focus on, you know, your relationships and things like that. So that was massively insightful. And that always brings me back of like, yes, I love business, but like, you know, my husband, my family, my friends, they are way priority over work.
Yeah.
99% of the time. I definitely slipped the 1%. Like I had a day last week where I was like, but you bring yourself
You're not
back.
perfect. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, I can see how that can be such a valuable guidepost. And even from a business aspect, right? Is that like, who are you hiring?
So key. Yeah, I just had an interview actually with someone right before, and I'm super stoked because team is everything. And especially visionary entrepreneurs, I have a belief that every visionary entrepreneur needs to have an operations person, whether that's 1 hour a week or 10 hours or full time. Visionaries need operators beside them, or they're not going to go nearly as fast as they want to.
What's an action step that you want to offer someone listening to this podcast?
Around profitability, or like around something they should do?
Anything that comes to mind. It could be profitability.
Well, I
That's
was
the
gonna say
direction.
I have an amazing opt-in right now on
Okay.
dianahouse.com that has my framework. It's like the 10 foundational things that I think everyone needs around profitability. So that was like the first thing that came up. If it was outside of my stuff, an action step. I mean, I would say, like, if you've never had a coach, hire a coach. Like, hire a great coach and go through and like do the work. If you don't have that foundation, you will not be able to grow as fast and as big as you can.
I saw on your YouTube channel once again that you hired Jarek Robbins.
I
I
did.
interviewed Jarek Robbins.
Oh, awesome. I love Jarek.
Yeah,
He's
he's
so great.
fantastic. Yeah, I'm a big Jarek Robbins fan.
Yeah, and that was funny because I remember at the time I really wanted, I love Tony Robbins. And I was like, I really want to be coached by Tony Robbins, but he's $1 million a year for 4 calls. And that feels a little bit out of my budget right now. And I was like, what would be the next closest thing? And I thought, hey, I heard his son is a coach. And I thought it was really cool because my dad is also a bit of a larger than life figure. So Jarek and I had a lot of commonalities with having these like very successful fathers as well. But yeah, no, I learned a lot about from Jarek, and he has just a beautiful mindset, amongst other things. So yeah, I really enjoyed working with him for a season.
Yeah, he's very humble.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, Diana, tell us how we can get in touch with you.
Yes. So my website is dianahouse.com, and that's just spelled like a house that you would live in. And I've recently jumped onto Instagram, and I am Diana at Powerhouse. And I always have some fun opt-ins on my site, so definitely check them out. And they're usually quite high value, and hopefully will get you into a more profitable state in your business.
Yeah, and we'll have the links in our show notes as well. Well, thank you so much, Diana. It's been awesome connecting with you.
Oh, thank you so much for having me on your podcast. I love it so much.